Welcome to this presentation on the Traffic Signs Regulations and General Directions 2016. Just for those who haven't met me before or aren't aware of me, I just want to introduce myself, Will Barron. I'm Director of the company. I take an overview of the product line and really a bit of a sort of connection to the industry. So I'm on various bodies with the DFT and British Standards Institute, BSI, the mirror committee to the European Standards Body, and I chair the working group too on traffic signs for ARTSM, the Association for Road Traffic Safety Manufacturers. So I used to work for Avon County Council many years ago now, but do like to keep on top of things. So Tsrgd 16, I've seen that referenced in various papers, so rather than say 2016, I may just be talking about Tsrgd 16, or indeed the statutory instrument. That is what it is. The SI was published, laid before Parliament on the 22nd of March, and will come into force tomorrow, on the 22nd of April. First thing I just want to do is set out a little agenda for the presentation here. So we'll start by looking at the background to the new regulations, and then briefly, in fact, touch on sign lighting and the changes that the new regulations have in terms of sign lighting, and also the provision of speed limit signs. So there are some relaxations there as well. The main body of the presentation really is to help you get to grips with the new document. So we've got a few screenshots from the PDF navigating the statutory instrument itself and all of those schedules there. Now, I'm terribly sorry, I have to apologise, but I make no apology for the fact that this presentation is really very based on documents. So it's largely PowerPoint, but we will dive in through the PDF, but then a screenshot of a PDF is not a great deal different from a PowerPoint. I have got key sign running in the background there, so if there are some questions, I will try and do my best to have a look and show what we have got in the new product to address the new regulations. It was released yesterday, so it is available for you to download and install and start to draw some of the new signs. Some of the new signs that were in the regulations were actually in the previous release, 19.0, albeit with a watermark on there saying that they have not been prescribed yet at the time. So they are available as of yesterday, and you can install that. Okay, so let's start with the background to the new regulations. I should just add actually that the webinar next week is going to be more focused on the provisions for Tsrgd in key sign. So do join us for that if you want to know how to use the product. Hopefully you'll have had a chance to install it and can get on and use it straight away after the presentation next week. Okay, so the background then to the new regulations, the changes that have been made to Tsrgd 16 are based on a complete review of traffic signs policy that the Department of Transport carried out. Several years in fact, and it culminated in a document called Signing the Way, which you'll see on screen there, and that was delivered, it was published in 2011. And this document sets out the recommendations for delivering a modernised legislative framework that could form the basis of the work to develop Tsrgd 16. And this was the first full revision since 2002. You'll all be aware there were amendment regulations in 2011, but that was really a minor revision and put into place some of the things that had been raised over the years, particularly with the authorizations process. So the new layout of the SI, the statutory instrument, is intended to make navigation easier. In particular, the aim was to have all the provisions and schedules and directions about all the provisions and directions about a particular sign in the same schedule. It was also supposed to reduce the size of the document, but it's gone from 448 pages, the 2002 version, to 546. Albeit, just note that it has got the inclusion of other regulations, as we'll see in a moment. and of course the 2011 amendments, which themselves were 126 pages. So all in all, it is a slimmed down document, and it's great to have that consolidation all in one place. One of the main aims was to do with sign clutter and reducing cost. So this actually, the relaxation of sign lighting, terminal signs and the like, gives local authorities more discretion in the placement of signs. So there are some significant cost savings that can accrue when you start using the new regs. And it was claimed when the SI was laid before Parliament that the new Tsrgd should give an estimated benefit to local authorities of around £7 million a year. I'll just go back a slide a second and say that separate to the policy review and the new regs, there's a new road signs task force chaired by Sir Alan Duncan MP, who's considering further issues around sign clutter. The recommendations that will arise from his work will feed into any future review of Tsrgd. So the new statutory instrument, new regs, can be downloaded from that link at the top of the page there. Now, I guess some of you will probably be scrabbling to write that down, but if you just write down the first part, in fact, just legislation.gov.uk/UKSI, obviously United Kingdom statutory instrument, then it'll take you to this page here. Not exactly this page. What I've done is obviously put the URL in at the top, the link there, legislation.gov.uk/UKSI, and then I've typed in traffic signs regulations to get this screenshot. So there you are, you hit enter on that. That's the only thing you need to do. I tried Tsrgd, but it did have found no results on that. And then you can see that at the top of the list is the Traffic Signs Regulations and General Directions 2016. Now that text might be a little bit small for you to see on your screens, I'm not sure, but if you search for Traffic Signs Regulations, then that 2016 version comes up directly. So the DfT are also going to release their notes on the new Tsrgd, which I understand is likely to be at least 100 pages. So they said they'd aim to have it out on 22nd of April. That's tomorrow, of course. It's not available as I looked yesterday, but we'll be able to give you more news during next week's webinar on that. So here is the new document. I've received that and a couple of copies for the office. It looks like it's a little bit grubby already. Actually, I took it in front of the sunshine yesterday, and it turns out that it's my window that's grubby. So now the document is quite weighty, and what you can see probably on the edge of it is something that they were trying to get to, which was an element of colour coding on the edges, but as a statutory instrument they were restricted a little bit in what they could do, but they did provide this grey colouring which actually goes into the page. So let's just open the document. This is actually Schedule 10 here, and you can see that grey colour goes into the page slightly. And so above this, out of sight of the camera, there are the first 9 schedules leafed up. So this can help with navigation, and it does mean that if you are looking for a general direction or the provisions in a particular schedule, you know you should be in that section so you don't leaf further forward, and that actually, I'm finding, is really helping. So you can see that highlighted there. Okay, so there were lots of regulations consolidated into Tsrgd 16. I won't read them out for you there, but it did mean that you had to go to lots of different documents, had to have them on the shelf, or maybe they were around the office and may have got lost a little bit. So great to have these in one place. So you see the school crossing patrol sign there is one of them. Of course, the amendment regulations all came in there. Now, all in one place. Importantly as well, the Tsrgd now will includes reference to the requirements of the harmonised European standard for fixed vertical traffic signs 12899. So that actually, as a European standard, specifies things like colour, values, and something, for example, dark green is not referenced in there, so the colours that are for use on various direction signs, for example, and the red and warning signs regulatory is referenced by reference to 12899, and statements are made about other colours that are not in that harmonised European standard. Now, there are going to be some changes to the traffic signs manual consequential on the relaxations and new signs. So let's just have a little look at what the DFT have told the industry about that. Well, Chapter 7, the one that's really important in terms of our software key sign and designing the direction signs there, that design guidance is still very much current. So you can continue using that. The 2013 edition will continue to be the best guidance for sign design for some time. Lowest priority really for them, but they will include, when it's revised and published, additional guidance for the design of Scottish bilingual direction signs. So that advice for Scottish bilingual direction signs will ultimately appear in Chapter 7. That's been worked up by the Scottish Office, so again that might be available ahead of the next formal publication of Chapter 7. But the changes to the regulatory parking and loading signs will impact on Chapter 3 mostly, so that is going to be the one that we believe they will work on first. And also some changes, we'll have a look at a couple of pages to do with cycle reservoir markings. So Chapter 5 on road markings again will need some revision there. But we're not sure when they will actually be published. We may have to wait perhaps until 2017 for these. But the DFT have said that they will try to make early drafts available, and this may be through a kind of peer review process, which is a sort of informal consultation process. And that's certainly going to help people get to grips with the new advice, to understand it, and indeed make sure that the documents that they produce are as good as they can be. Tsrgd itself underwent significant consultation. They did a roadshow and they had over 1,000 people attend that. So they are one of the government departments that make very good efforts to ensure that industry is made aware of changes that have an impact, and also to get good feedback from them to make sure the documents are as good as possible. Turn to another matter now, the type approval regulations. Now the new Tsrgd actually revokes the long-standing requirement for type approval to be required by the Secretary of State. So particularly with traffic control equipment, probably not too relevant to a lot of people who are signed on today, has been dropped and will now go to a voluntary organisation called TOPAS, loosely, the Traffic Open Products and Specifications Group. You can see their address there. They are actually now going to be the only source for product registration. So essentially, over the formal prescribed regulatory framework that was type approval, and TOPAS have been transferring existing type approvals to the new register for quite some time, I think maybe as much as 18 months. So anybody who's involved in that area or wants to ensure that the products that you're purchasing for use on your traffic schemes are going to be interoperable and will operate as claimed by the manufacturer. So it is a voluntary scheme, but there are some 100 plus, maybe as much as 150 products already in the register, and of course it is going live tomorrow. So let's touch upon sign lighting. The bulk of sign lighting really is in the schedule, so that's where you'll actually check whether particular signs that you put on are going to require sign lighting. But in brief, really, you can say that there is significant relaxation, particularly on the warning signs. There were a number of options that were presented to the public and to ministers, including relaxation of regulation to light any sign, but it was felt as sort of a middle way where warning signs were less required given the technologies, particularly in the cubic shape of retro-reflective material. But lighting still required for safety critical signs. So do bear that in mind, particularly the warning on low or any bridge height, the warning for bridge heights. But do be aware that just because the regulations relax the requirements for things like sign lighting, that it may still be worth providing, particularly if the modern retroreflective materials are not suitable for a particular site. Of course, by providing very good and very bright retroreflectivity to the driver, then that means that the beam is more focused. So if you were coming around the corner to see a warning sign and it can't be angled in such a way that drivers are going to be seeing them easily, then sign lighting might well be worth providing. And do, of course, be aware, I'm sure most of you are by now, that the best effect from the modern materials comes when you are very close to the light source. So if you're in a car, that works pretty well, but in a lorry where you're considerably higher than the headlights themselves, then it is of much limited use and in fact can have a worse effect than the old-fashioned round beaded reflective materials. So again, touch briefly upon the relaxations to do with speed limit, terminal and repeater signs. So again, it's no longer required to place a repeater sign on both sides of the carriageway, which can obviously save quite a bit of money, particularly if lighting requirements are kick in because the system, it's near a system of street lighting. So there's some illumination requirements there that double the cost essentially when that's the case. And also, of course, you have to put the extra structure, the post and the foundation, in for both signs. So it may be that depending on how visible a particular speed limit is, and certainly the general public will probably expect to see both sides signed, that they may miss the beginning of speed limits, particularly with the transition into the new regulations. So it may be that you should consider a larger single sign, perhaps, but just because the relaxation is there doesn't mean that in every case you should not consider very seriously providing two signs in any case. This may well provide better compliance with the speed limit, and it's all about whether drivers can see that, whether they are aware that they have entered into a new speed limit area. And I guess that it would be sensible to monitor compliance if you go for the lower cost option, and if compliance isn't sufficient, then you start adding the extra signs. So with speed limit repeater signs, again, there was a relaxation that these were not required at regular intervals. That was actually brought in the 2011 amendment regulations, and a lot of people took that really to mean that they didn't have to put repeaters at all, or perhaps they would in fact having just a single sign in the middle of the speed zone. But the intention was that relaxation not to happen at regular intervals enabled local authorities not to have to put signs on posts. They could just put them on the lighting columns, for example, even if the lighting columns themselves weren't, strictly speaking, at good regular intervals. But again, it's about compliance really with speed limits, so do consider a series of regular signs. They may well provide better compliance to the regulations, and again, it's worth monitoring that compliance to see whether the speed limits are being adhered to. So let's get into the slightly more interesting part of the presentation, actually navigating the statutory instrument itself. Okay, so bring up Schedule 2. This is just the first page of Schedule 2. In fact, it's not the first page, it's Part 2 of Schedule 2. But it's the first page that you will come to when you flick through the document. The previous parts, I'll just remind myself what that is actually. So this is page 39. I'm afraid I haven't got all the pages on these screenshots, but for my benefit, at least for the moment, 39 is the first is the numbered page there. In fact, page 38 is part 1, and that has some provisions on it. So if you've got a copy to hand, then you can open that up. so page 38. It's just as you open the document, you see the image on the lower half. Have a look at the document in a moment, in fact, because you'll all probably by now know that it's gone landscape mode. Okay, so the first thing to notice there is that in the middle you've got the idea that we are talking about a template. So rather than rely on the working drawings for the prescribed sizes for warning signs, which may be different across different types of warning signs, those sizes are now given in the part 2, the header of the schedule there. So we've got the 5 sign heights for the triangle there, and 6 or so, I think it is 6 heights for the legend, for the X height there. And obviously you choose an X height to make sure that depending on the legend on the supplementary plate, you would make sure that the plate itself is of a commensurate size to the warning sign. So just hold that thought in mind. We've got the prescribed sizes for the signs that warn of hazards and signs for bridges and other structures at the head of the schedule. That isn't always the case, depending on the schedule. So it's all about tables. This is the sign table for Schedule 2 in Part 2, as you can see labelled just above the table there. And it's about navigating across from left to right. So first of all, column 1 there, you've got the item number. Now that item number is quite important. They were going to rely almost entirely, I think, on the reference. So this would be Schedule 2, Part 2, Item 1, but the feedback from industry was very much to retain the diagram numbers there. But the item numbers are not redundant. If you notice across on column 5 on the right, then the text there is in italics is supplementary associated plate, and in brackets by reference to Part 3 sign table item number. So those item numbers are actually cross-referenced within the statutory instrument itself. So going on to column 2 there, we've got description. That's a thing that used to appear on the 2002 regs and previous regs. Got the diagram number, of course, there. And the description, so we've got the crossroads ahead, and it mentions that there are alternative types available there as well. And they're nicely pictured. Now in the previous regulations, you'd see only the main variant, and the permitted variants you'd have to go to a working drawing. So it's nice to see at least images there. And we know worse than the situation that we had before in terms of referencing that. One might have referenced that as 504.1 variant A or B or whatever it is. Not even sure that the working drawing has that sub-reference there. So we're still probably going to put images into our sign schedules to make sure that we get what we order. So moving on then, just highlight those images that we've got there. And then column 4, the first associated plate legend. So for these signs in Schedule 2, it may be possible to put more than one supplementary plate there. Now the legend there is just described as being a distance. We'll see shortly with some other examples where specific legends are highlighted. But obviously, if you've got a crossroads ahead, then you could put you would put the distance in the supplementary plate. And column 5, we've got the supplementary associated plate. As I mentioned, that's by reference to Part 3. That's the next table in the schedule. And the item number 1 there, you can see I've just got a little extract at the bottom. It's possibly a little bit small for you to see the detail of that. The heights of that sign are based on the X heights next to the image, and the diagram number 511, you'll all be familiar with that. So that is a bit of cross-referencing. You have to have some fingers to place as you leaf forward into the document. Column 6 then, we've got the provisions. Now have a look at a couple of examples of that, and that's in Part 7 of the schedule. Make sure that you're not going beyond the little grey block on the outside of the document to find Part 7 in the specific schedule. And again, Schedule 2, general directions. In this case, none apply to that particular diagram number, but again, those general directions will be at the back of the schedule, still in that same grey area. So let's have a little bit of another example here. So we've got the diagram 510 roundabout head sign. And as you see in column 4, we've got the distance, or it could be the supplementary plate has the legend adverse camber on there. So what I wanted to focus on for this was the supplementary associated plate. Again, it's referencing Part 3. We're looking at an extract from Schedule 2, Part 2. You can see that at the top left. And the signs 1 or 4, or indeed both, would be permitted with this roundabout head sign. So I've just got the extract from the table there. Items 1 and 4 obviously missed out, cut away 2 and 3 there. So here you would have your roundabout warning sign, then you'd have your supplementary plate for the distance, and your reduced speed now, and then the adverse camber warning lorries. There's a risk of lorries overturning. So that'd be quite an assembly. You've got the 4 signs on there. Not uncommon actually to have quite so many signs on there. A little bit difficult from a structural point of view unless you've got software that enables that. So various legends and systems across there. In that case, those Part 3 signs actually only require the 4 columns to cover the variations there. Okay, so one thing, let's just move on to the provisions there. The applicable provisions in Part 7, Item 3. Let's not concentrate on the detail of that text, but you can see that we would leaf forward to Part 7 and find the provisions, in this case number 3, and it's all about the provision of a roundabout sign on a VMS, on a variable message sign, where you can have the legend slow down. So that's an additional provision, an additional legend that would be permitted under the new regulations for that sign when used on a VMS. Okay, so just to mention here, we've got some provisions 6 and 12 with the maximum headroom sign. This is a safety critical sign. So the thing I wanted to highlight here was, of course, as you get to know the document, then you start to know the numbers. Lighting requirements were covered in the back of the 2002 statutory instrument, and you'd know that if you were looking at a provision and it referenced item X, whatever that would be, then you could say, the lighting requirements are necessary. So here we've got the applicable provisions in Part 7 for this Schedule 2 sign, 6 and 12. Now, Provision 6 is illumination. So I can just mention there we've got illumination for Schedule 2 is column 5, Part 7, Provision 6. So maybe write that down, 576. So you'd know that Provision 6 is the one for illumination. And every time you're looking through Schedule 2 and you see number 6 in column 5, you know that that sign requires illumination. Just make a note there that this is the safety critical warning sign, so that's why number 6 is on there. So 576. Bear that in mind. Okay, so moving on to Schedule 3 then, the title for that schedule is Upright Signs that indicate regulatory requirements for moving traffic. Essentially it's your regulatory signs, but not all of them. There are other schedules including other regulatory signs. Again, we've got the area at the top, the sort of the template for the 2 signs together. So again, looking at the diameter, the height of those round signs, that's actually as indicated in column 4. You've got your prescribed X heights for the plate legend again, but of course column 4 is where the heights come for those. Just moving forwards, this is actually Schedule 10. This is Part 2, the sign table in Schedule 10 that I'm reading off the label at the top left corner of the table itself. And in this particular case, the sign heights are actually against each individual sign. And these Schedule 10 signs, again, they're regulatory, but they are signs and road markings indicating speed limits. So those regulatory signs are in an entirely separate schedule themselves. Going back, though, to Schedule 3 for a moment, we've got the heights, as I mentioned. That in this particular case, they're actually in the column. Just compare that with the Schedule 2 signs. Looking again in terms of the lighting requirements and various differences and similarities, of course, a legend is appropriate for warning signs and also for the regulatory signs. That the first associated plate legend and the associated plate legends are in different columns because the sign diameters are in column 4, so that pushes the legend across to column 5. So in terms of referencing, if somebody says, oh, it's the legend I've taken from Schedule 3, Part 2, column 5, then it's not quite so easy to remember these things, I think. Okay, so let's have a look at example there. We've got diagram 609 here, and I wanted to look at the associated legend here because we saw, you'll see in some of the examples, may have the one where you have the distance or adverse camber, where the legend is actually in the table itself. But in this particular case, we've got the legend is by reference to an item number in Part 3. So a lot of legends there available that would be applicable for this particular group of signs. This group of 2, though, this diagram number, it's only 1, 2, or 3, so one-way, dual carriageway, or one of the exceptions, except buses or taxis or cycles. So again, you're leafing forward to see which legends are associated with that particular diagram number. Applicable provisions, I mentioned that we would have a little look at those. So we've got provisions in Part 4 of 1, 2, and 4. That's the part just beyond the one we've had a little look at there. So 1, 2, and 4, again, don't want to necessarily concentrate on the detail of the particular part there, but I wanted to highlight Part 4 because in this particular case, illumination for Schedule 3 signs is 644. Before it was 576. So column 6, part 4, provision 4. So the provision number is not the same in every schedule, so do watch out for that. One might like to highlight at the very top of the schedule the illumination provision for the particular signs. So this particular sign here, it is subject to illumination when the sign is placed on a road subject to speed limit greater than 20 miles an hour and where it's within 50 meters of any lamp, and so on. Okay, so signs for speed limits. I did mention the one thing just to repeat here. We've got the different heights for those roundels on there and the applicable provision here, 1, 2, and 3. Illumination is column 5, as you can see highlighted, part 3, and provision 2. So again, a different number again. Just really wanting to highlight that the illumination requirements, which are relaxed, does mean that you have to be pretty careful to check whether it's required or not, are in the different, have the different provision numbers there. Okay, so moving then on, we've got Schedule 4, upright signs of control, parking, waiting, parking and loading. Now this is the area where from a design perspective there are significant changes, which we'll be showing in detail next week. I can show you the dialogue that we've got just to give you a bit of a heads up on what you can expect in the version of KeySign that was released this week. And the main thing really is, again, based on the sort of the template that you've got there, that the design is significantly more flexible. So let's just move forward to the provisions that apply for these signs. Again, there's a lot of text on there, but thing just to highlight is the flexibility that's enshrined, encapsulated, if you like, in the text. Panels included in a sign may be placed in any vertical or horizontal combination, but need not be aligned vertically or horizontally. No more than 2 panels may be placed horizontally. That's an important restriction, obviously, we need to echo within the software. And where panels are placed vertically, they must be of the same width. There isn't, I believe, a provision for them not being the same height. And no white panel may be placed above a yellow panel, which is in the same column. So just a couple of restrictions there about the layout of these kind of multi-panel signs. We think of them really as a series of signs that are joined together, but you can see that the terminology used there is all about panels. Okay, so I want to move on then to some other issues there. There are some new signs, so what I'm just going to do is come out of the PowerPoint here and actually we'll go directly into the statutory instrument itself. Now, the first thing just to note on page 1 of 547 there is there's some great contents, all beautifully page numbered. The 2002 version didn't actually give page numbering on the contents, so that's a great addition there. So if you're looking for specific parts and specific schedules, I'll just move down a page and zoom in on that top page, top of the second page there. Then you can see I was looking at Schedule 2, signs that warn of hazards and signs of bridges and other structures. Move through to sign 3 and then Schedule 4. In fact, we'd only got as far as page 81 in terms of navigating the main important parts of the document, page 81 of over 540 pages there. So that page numbering is pretty useful and will help you navigate a document. But as I move forward, and I'm just scrolling my wheel mouse down through the pages, you go through all of the various parts, so the regulations themselves, just whiz through here, and eventually you get to the pages that we were looking at in my PowerPoint presentation, and it goes landscape. So a little tip here, if you have got your Adobe Reader there, then one thing you can do is rotate the view so that you can go clockwise, but of course, and go clockwise so that it becomes landscape. Of course, if you go back, then you're looking sideways at the text in the earlier parts of the document, and the whole document isn't landscape from here on. Okay, now the first thing I thought would be interesting to point out for this presentation is just to look at the pages from 278 onwards. I've got some page references here. So this is part 5 of Schedule 12. I'll just go back a page here. So part 4 of provisions applicable. In fact, let's just roll back to the first part of Schedule 12, shall I do that? Well, here we are. I think that's it, part 2. We got some, sorry, flicking rather too quickly there for you, but Schedule 12 is direction signs. There's obviously the general information to start with. We've got the sign backgrounds that are available. These are just really the different ways of laying these things out within the new document. And moving forwards then, not too quickly so that your screens refresh in time, to part 3, which has the legends that are shown and just some restrictions about that. And part 3, again about the legends and the restrictions. And then moving forward, I will just flick forward back to my 278 references. So here what we've got is the new document doesn't have many example signs in there, certainly not on the direction signs, because it's so flexible. What they've done, in fact, is actually prescribe the components for use on direction signs. So it's rather strange, I think, to see these components in isolation. It was nice to see how they were used, and one that I find particularly strange is the new regulation that enables this bottom symbol for use in a sign. I would like to see some example signs of that. So an indication of appropriate traffic lanes at a junction or junction ahead where the routes reached from both the left-hand and right-hand lanes can also be reached from the center lane. So that's a design change that you will see in KeySign going forward, where we can enable those components that are new in the regulations. So they've also got a central one for a splitter where the 2 lane arrows are angled at the bottom of that page, and so on and so forth. So this going through right the way through to page 290 shows the components that are used within the newly laid out regs. And they all have their different variants. So perhaps if I go back to Crossroads, you can see that the number and direction of exit routes may be varied, the shape of the symbol may be varied, and so on. There are some new signs. I've read somewhere that 50 new signs have been added, and there are many more permitted variants for previously prescribed signs. So ones that are now very much in the regulations, go forward to page 349, are the tiger tail signs. They've had some working drawings for these for a while. That's something we're working on automating, so through a dialogue dialogue basis, where you can just click to indicate the number of lanes that you want and the legends at the top. That will come into the next version. Currently the design of those is pretty tricky, And I think there may be some library signs available for that. The next page obviously sets out the same kind of tiger tail signs where high traffic flows warrant the provision of 2 separate slip points at which traffic can leave the main carriageway are now prescribed for primary roads as well. So another sign that's worth having a little look at, it's on the next page, a similar thing where you've got a exit onto the right there, and that's a sign that we've had in version 19 and will now come in without the watermark stamp in 19.1, I believe. Just go back to the lane divider because there's some signs that make use of the different lane dividers. I think I may have already shown this, in fact. Oh yes, so here we are, some signs with a different style of lane divider. I don't know if you remember one of the classic optical illusions here, but there's one where the 2 parallel lines just don't seem to look parallel, and for my eye, I think that actually is an optical illusion. It looks rather strange to my eye there. Okay, I did mention the road markings as well. The cycle reservoir changes have been changed. It's made it more flexible to provide cycle reservoirs for cyclists. Previously in the 2002 regulations, it wasn't possible for cyclists to enter the cycle reservoir because, of course, they had to go past the stop line. So they made some changes to this, prescribing the gaps there. You can see at the bottom 2 images. Also enabling a cycle lane down the middle of 2 lanes of traffic, particularly useful for cyclists who either want to turn right, just access the central there by overtaking traffic, which perhaps is a little bit squeezed where they get stuck and can't undertake. So again, there's a safety issue there by enabling the entry to the cycle reservoir from the middle there. People often miss cyclists coming up the inside, of course. And another form of that here where you've got actually a stop line, and I need to read the various directions and requirements of the stop line because this seems to go back to the situation where cyclists are not able to enter the cycle reservoir, but in fact the requirement will enable them to do so, either the requirement or the general direction. Now, essentially, this goes back to a point I was going to make later about the savings. So this essentially actually now prescribes that kind of layout if you've had one in place for some time. I've certainly seen this layout quite commonly around the place where a little cheat perhaps with the diagram number there, sorry, which diagram number, the dotted line I should say, is used as an entry point so that cyclists didn't have to cross the stop line. Okay, so another thing just to focus on, some additional items in there. You've got provision now for the ridden horse routes with the route number, so H for horse, I guess. So that is now prescribed there. And going on from that, where you've got signing for ridden horses and the routes, then shared use crossings come into play. So I'll first of all just look at the equestrian crossing provision. So there's a couple of diagram numbers that are related to this. So 453, for example, page. You've got the light signals for equestrian traffic, and on page following, but 1, you've got the location for you've got the push button unit, the PBU there, that would go on the posts. I guess that would have to be high so that the riders can reach that. And then the associated markings, so this would be pages 4, 7, 8. This is just a general shared use marking. And on the next one, again, shared use here, you've got the label, the bottom right of the actual image there, equestrian crossing. And then pedestrian or cycle or toucan crossing in the top part of that. So actually separating them with those there. Okay, so that's equestrian crossings and shared use crossings. A couple of other matters. It's no longer a requirement to illuminate self-writing retro-reflective bollards. So one of the big problems, I think, with the SRBs, the self-writing retroreflective bollards, is that they either have to have illumination, so they have to have electrics. Not great if they are hit, because the idea of the SRBs, self-writing retroreflective bollards, is that they can be struck and they will return to upright, give or take a few degrees. But if you have electrics there, then they can get damaged. So what the idea for a lot of these products on the market is that they will have a solar cell, but they still require a battery in the base. So not needing lighting is certainly a benefit there. Fluorescent backing boards are now allowed in the general directions. So that is on page 16. I'll just flick to that, see if I can't pick that out. Obviously need to rotate my view to make that a little bit more visible for you there. So fluorescent backing boards are now allowed, and it's part 2, section 9. Just scroll up there. And again, I just really wanted to bring this up because although I'm not exactly finding the fluorescent, there's the word fluorescent at the bottom there. You can see in the middle we've got reference to the Harmonised European Standard 12899 on that. School crossing patrols I mentioned, that's now in the regs, so here we go. So just rotate the view back again. And you can see the school crossing patrol is now on there, and you've got the applicable requirements, who can or cannot operate those. Also the stop for police, that stop sign that's got the word police instead of the children, that also is in here as well. Okay, last couple of matters here. We've got for those who are designing the Scottish bilingual signs, I'll just go through right forward to page 541 and show the background, the grave accented characters there. It's now a formalized and finalized alphabet there. There were initially some moves to use the grave based on the French look, or the one that's used in Wales, but this is a steeper angle above the letters there, and there were some changes quite recently to the form that you see in the regulations there. So they're the yellow on black, and if I go forward to the next page, you can see the green on white characters there. Okay, so some other issues just to mention. I'll go back to the PowerPoint, in fact, here. Let's just get my presentation up again. Other issues then, the DFT have previously received quite a lot of authorization requests for non-standard weight limit signs, and they were certainly hoping to avoid that workload. There's actually a substantial difficulty of enforcement of limits that don't correspond to a plated vehicle weight. So it is likely, we're told, that the Traffic Signs Manual Chapter 3 will continue to recommend using 3.5, 7.5 and 18 tonnes, but it is allowable for you to use anything else, but that'll be at each local authority's own risk regarding the enforceability of those. An additional variant for the 616 no entry sign supplementary plate, except cycles, the variant of exceptions for cycles, has already been prescribed for some time for authorities in England as a result of an area-wide special direction given to them since October 2011, but as this variant is now in the statutory instrument, it can now be used in Wales and ultimately in Scotland too. And the last thing to mention then is that there are some savings, 2919. That is still allowed until 2022. Essentially the savings enshrined in the 2011 regulations have been brought forward. But in other respects, all other signs can remain as prescribed by previous regulations. So this is essentially lifetime's savings. So there is a regulation in there. It'll be either a provision or a direction that all signs prescribed by previous regulations will continue to be prescribed except as amended or revoked. And that, as I say, effectively gives lifetime savings for anything that's out already. Thanks very much to everybody for taking the time out of your busy working day to join this presentation. I hope you found it useful. Do please join us for other webinars and presentations in the future. Thanks again. Bye-bye.